Thank you very much. I'm delighted to welcome you all today, both virtually and in person, to the book launch. That is not a book launch. No, it is an event to celebrate the recent publication by Trevor, which is called Autism, A Student's Guide. Trevor is an established author, and his previous work spans a range of different educational issues, including sexuality in education, play, autism, and family relationships. And Trevor, I believe, has a number of publications already in the pipeline for the future, so watch this space. This time, this place, next year, Trevor, for another book launch, not the book launch?
The next one comes out in July, and then there's 2 more ready for Christmas.
Wow, busy man. Fantastic, thank you. So, a bit about Trevor. So, Trevor started his career as a science teacher, and his passion for SEND really started to develop during his time at Nottingham College. And he joined the university back in 2013. And during that time, Trevor spotted that there was a gap in the landscape to do with SEND in HE, and so took it on himself to design and launch the BEA Honours SEND programme that is still the 3rd largest SEND programme currently in England. So well done, Trevor, for that foresight. So Trevor is held in high regard by both students and staff alike, and I think testimony to that is is sort of like the turnout today. When you consider all the people in the room and around about 120 online we've got following us today, absolutely fantastic. It's a real credit to you, Trevor, and the work you do. Trevor is an award-winning educator who strives to give his students the best possible start to their careers in SEND and has a national reputation in this field. So, without further ado, I think I've said enough about Trevor, and I think it's time to pass over the mic and for Trevor to share his insights and the research that has informed his latest publication. So, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for people attending in taking your time out to listen to an old bloke talk about his book. And also to people online, I hope that you find it insightful. 120,000 words is a lot to get through in half an hour. So if I start at page 1, by the time we finish, you might be on page 3. Okay, so my idea is not to really focus on the book as much. That's why I've called it It's Not a Book Launch. It's been a joke between the team and the people who've organised this. And can I say, before I do anything, can I really thank the people who've been instrumental in organising this, and also the people who are on site now delivering it online and making sure it's working through. So the events team with Nick and people like that, as well as the colleagues in SEND and in education. So I'd really like to thank these people at the beginning of this book. Okay, so it's very much about this, and that's why I've called it Welcome to It's Not a Book Launch, okay? Because it really is about sharing an insight to why did I write this book. Sarah's correct, I have had publications in the past, and there are some in the future, pretty quickly, that I'm writing at the moment. But I thought this, for me, was a particularly passion, that I wanted to write a book that covered autism in the widest perspective. And that's why I've talked about looking at autism through a series of lenses. So, why I wrote the book, okay? There's your 3. Okay, source of contemporary issues and debates, that's a given. Okay, perhaps you may think the second one, so my team can say, what, another book? Yeah, that is a quote. Less so the third one, okay, to pay for the vet's bills, and also barber jackets and barber shirts are expensive. So I didn't write the book for that. I wrote the book, and I was quite clear with the publishers that I wanted that strapline, A Student's Guide, because there's lots of books out there, particularly with autism, that are very academic, that are very focused on research. That's not to say research and academia is not important, because that is what the book is also about. Because I'm a strong believer that when we are talking about SEND, when we're talking about areas like autism, it's important that people reading the book have an understanding of what research-informed practice is about. So there is quite a lot of research into that book, but it's really about wanting to get the message out about autism, and I could have called it Autism: A Student's Guide / teachers / practitioners / families, because everybody within those perspectives are involved into the book. So the focus of the book is really three things, and this is my sort of mantra for how I think SEND works, in particularly in our degree and other areas I've written. One is very much about research, and in the book there's a lot of research. If you go on to the end of each chapter, there's lots of references, yeah? And students will know how much I have to focus on references. They're nodding away. And so there is that research. You've got to have the research. So this book was written end of last year. It came out end of December, beginning of January. But again, when you think about that, I could go into the same research and find that research has moved on. So, and that's the issue, is that research does move on. But I was quite clear that students and people reading the book were going to be informed with what the research was saying about autism, because that makes the people who are talking about it actually knowledgeable. And there's nothing that I get that's more beneficial for me, it makes me happy, than students going out and staff going out and saying, you know what, I saw this happening and I challenged it. And I said, why is this the case? So they're going through equipped with that knowledge base in that process. The second theme running all the way through the book is about the impact. And people who know me and know how I teach and also the modules that I work with, I'm very much about lived experience. And so running through the book is also the impact that autism has had on families, it's had on practitioners, it's had on siblings, it's had on the individual. So the impact is quite important. It's no good just reading a sterile book and not understanding, well, actually, what is the issue around that focus. And then the third bit, the third strand running through, is about very much taking that knowledge, taking that research, and making it relevant to your practice, okay? So again, it's about research-informed practice. So whether you're talking about using things like social stories or cartoon conversations or PECs or whatever you're looking at, or whether you're supporting adults in the community, it's important to understand what practices are there and how have they been informed by research. So there's three themes that are running through the book. One is about evidence, the research base and the theoretical underpinning. The second one is about the impact that the autism has on a wide scope of people. And the third one is very much around, so how do we do it? I hate the word support, yeah? I like the words working with. So, but unfortunately, working with doesn't necessarily work within the chapter titles. So I have to be guided by what sometimes the published words. But I like the word support. And I like that notion. And what drives the book is the notion that we need to look at autism through a series of lenses. So, what started it up? So I just want to just show you a quick video. This is me, I'm afraid, talking. But this gives you an insight to what my passion is and how I work through. I explain what SpringPod is. SpringPod is a professional organisation. They came into the university. They worked with me at the beginning of September. And they filmed me actually in this room and walking around. So there's lots of me walking around the university, lots of me talking. But it's very much, if you want about getting an insight to what SEND is about and how I feel about autism and how I feel about labelling and how I feel about issues related to SEND, then have a look. It's 60 minutes long, so I'm not going to throw the whole thing at you today, but on the PowerPoint you'll see the link. So if you are interested in and you want to listen to my sort of vision and how I think SEND ought to work, then it's worthwhile having. And you can see the chapter 3, they call them chapters. So one is about the nature of SEND, 2 is about inclusion, debate around inclusion, autism spectrum is chapter 3, and then basically getting students to do it. It's aimed at students, but I think it's also got some interesting focus around how students can be working with individuals with SEND. So if I just show you the beginning bit, which gives you a flavour for how I perceive SEND. Special educational needs and disability is a subject that permeates every aspect of society. High quality teaching that is differentiated and personalised will meet the individual needs of most children and young people. Therefore, every teacher is a teacher of SEND. Inclusivity is about supporting all pupils' learning. And there are several specialist strategies which can be used to ensure that all learners can fulfil their potential. Labels can be sticky and stay with an individual throughout their life. Inaccurate labels may lead to inappropriate interventions or assumptions about what a learner can and cannot do and what they do and do not need. Join me as I look beyond labels when it comes to SEND. I'm Trevor Cotterill, and this is your Subject Spotlight. Me in 30 seconds, okay? And delve behind that, and then you'll get a flavour for how I was recording this at the same time as writing the book. So the messages from the book are also permeating through that presentation. So, the journey. Okay, I'd be great to say that the journey was like the road on the left. Yeah, you put a proposal in to a publisher, and the publisher say, oh, yeah, that's okay. Well, let's go with, there's a gap in the market. Yeah, go with it, send a proposal. So you have to send a proposal in, and you write the chapter headings, and you give a synopsis and everything. Then it gets sent off to the publisher, and you think, we're waiting. And then the publisher go, we're going to send it out. And they're sent to critical people. So they're sent to SEND specialists in the field. So the SEND specialists look at this, and they say, oh, that's interesting. I think I would change that. So they are your critical friends. That comes back to the publisher, and that's why it's the windy road. So then you then make that decision with the publisher. Shall I change anything? Shall I keep it as it is? Or is it fulfilling what the brief of the... And remember, the publishers are, they're not necessarily your best friend. They're there to make a living. So they're not going to publish a book that's not going to sell. So that's the first thing. So interestingly enough, when that came back from these 3 people who had looked at it, there was only one change they saw. So they think, yeah, you're on a roll. You can write. You can do it. So you write your first chapter. You send it in. It comes back, I think you can change that. But I was very, very, very clear that this book was about student focus. So there needed to be case studies. There needed to be research. There needed to be the lived experience. There needed to be that practical side, but also understanding that it's an academic text. And when a student comes back and says, you know what, I understand this, I think this is really good. It's not dumbing down. It's actually telling me what it's about. And even better, not even better, but better when somebody says, actually, I'm not in SEND, but actually reading this chapter has made my avenues open. I really get it now. So that's that critical approach to the book that I wanted to focus on. So just to give you that kind of journey, it is that backwards and forwards, publisher to me back. It's almost like that, to me, to you, to me, to you. And then at the end, they go, that's okay. And you think, yes, I've done it. And then it comes, oh, you've missed a sentence. You've missed a reference. You've missed a full stop. Oh, for goodness sake. But then I think that's exactly what we do with our students. Yeah. So when I give students feedback, proofread. Yeah, make sure your references are there, and that's the case. And so it goes backwards and forwards, and then it gets the editor, and then proofreader, etc., etc. And then they go, this is ready to go, and it will be published in 3 months. And that's it. So it's very much, it's not I've got an idea, I'll write it, and then it's published. It is that very much that windy road through. But that's what makes it fulfilling, because you know what's out there has been through that critical appraisal. And therefore, you know that hopefully what you have written will be useful for people who are reading the book. So, just to give you the idea of a couple of lenses that I focus in the book. I'm not going to go through each section, I'm not going to go through each chapter, but just to give you a flavour of this perspective on autism, which is through a multiple lens perspective. And it's so important to pick that up. That if I just wrote an academic text about the research into autism, I would find it very dry. Yeah? And why would I want to do that? Because I can go back to the articles and see the people who've done it. My job is to make sure those articles are breathable, are livable, so you understand it. That's not dumbing the articles down, but making sure that actually it is relevant to you as a reader. And the other thing the publishers wanted was a book that would cover an area that's used throughout the country. So for postgraduate, for undergraduates, for practitioners, for families, that kind of book. So to actually have that as this is your strap line, it's got to appeal to this whole range of people. Yeah? And that's some going. And that's what I hope I've achieved in the book. And for me, and again in the book, I also talk about neurodiversity and typical and atypical, all those sort of terminology. So I think one area of autism is very much about the discourses. And there is a huge discourse debate running all the way through the book. What do we call it? Do we call it autism spectrum disorder? Do we call it autism? Do we say the autistic person? Do we, whatever. So there's a whole kind of debate around that. But one particular debate I'm very, very focused on in the text is moving away from the deficit model. You can't do that. There are issues, the medicalization of autism. And I think that's one of the real founding points that I wanted to make. So it's about looking at the strengths of the autistic individual. Whether it's a child, a young person, or an adult, I really want to tip that lens away from the deficit model. And I talk about diagnosis and I talk about all that, but let's have a look about what that is very much around the issues around what they call the impairment. Yeah? Also, I think it's an interesting one. You'll find that it's about rethinking encounters. And this is something really interesting that I found, was often when we talk about social deficits, we talk about the social issues with social communication deficits with autism. So I twist that and say, let's rethink that. Let's rethink the encounter. It's not an impairment. It's not the person who's living with autism. The autistic person can't get the message across. It's actually you can't understand the message. So it's very much about rethinking. You'll see a message running through the back. It's about rethinking encounters. So what I wanted to do was tip it on its head. Move away from the deficit. Move away from that, what you can't do. And why can't you do that? What are the strengths of autism? What are the encounters? So it's not about social communication problems. Yeah, it's about rethinking that. It's a two-way process. And that's quite an important message that I wanted to ride all the way through. So it's about discourses, it's about using terminology that I think is important for people working in the field. Yes, there's a whole section, because that's my background as a scientist, there's a whole section on what is the research into genetics and also neuroanatomy. So when you look at the book, it's the current research into genes and genetics, looking at particularly the genes which are responsible. And I always say, I was working with a group this morning for a few hours online, and I was saying the characteristics, I don't call them symptoms, the characteristics that you see in a class or whatever, there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. There's a reason why these individuals are behaving or showing that particular issue. And for me, it's another message coming through. You have to understand the etiology. You have to understand what the issues are. So there is a large section on the genes and chromosomes if you're interested in the genes which are responsible for development within the brain and what parts of the brain will link into language, what parts of the brain link into attention, what parts of the brain link into planning and organization. And there's also a section on connectivity and very much around how the brain is connected and in terms of how the brain is wired. So there's a section very clearly about how the brain is organized, how the brain develops, the characteristics that you see. The bottom line is there is a reason behind it. And I think it's important, anybody working with people with autism, is that you understand what's behind the characteristics or behaviour that you see. So there is quite a lot of research in there, up-to-date research, as well as looking at the impact that research has. So there's a reason why we're now very much focused in autism around social. That word social is so important now in autism. It's crept in, not crept in, but very much risen to the top. And that's about social communication. So there's a big emphasis, strong emphasis in the book on social issues, social communication, the social brain, social communication, that kind of approach through. And then when we look at interaction, so if you think about the SEND code of practice, autism is clearly in the area of need on communication and interaction. That's where the SEND code of practice puts autism. So there's a lot in the book about that. Why has the autism in the SEND code of practice in interaction? That's because that social encounters bit, which is there. So there is the evidence, that's the evidence base into that process. There is the classic theories. Again, if you studied anything around autism, you'll know about theory of mind and executive dysfunction and central coherence. So there is that, but I twist it. Why should we call it weak central coherence? Why under neurodiversity we're talking about different ways of thinking? So, and also, if we say that there's an issue with planning, there's an issue, well, actually, what are the strengths? What can we now work with? Again, not the word support. How can we work with autistic individuals to look at that? So there are classic theories are there because that any student writing an essay on autism will know that. But I've really upped that and focused very much on two issues. One is about critical autism studies, which is let's remove the medicalization process. Let's look at actually the neurodiversity model and look at how we need to rethink. So that idea I talked to you about encounters. It's not a deficit, it's a difference. It's a difference. So let's talk about differences rather than deficits. And the message, a theme that also runs through, and there's a chapter on this one, is we need to look at autistic people as researchers. So there's a section there on about power. And the idea that, you know, why should it always be that the neurotypical individual is doing the research on autism? And so there's a big movement in the text which is looking at autistic people as researchers. And also, not just individual people, but looking at families. So there's a section around looking at families and siblings in relation to autism. And I think that's missing. So a lot of texts are looking at research which has been done. Research which has been done on autistic individuals. This is what we did. Well, that's nice. What did you find? We found this, did you? That's nice. Well, what does that tell us? You know, they're not rats in a cage. So that real focus on autism, autistic people as researchers, is a message that's running all the way through the book. As you saw in the video, I am not a great believer in labeling, yeah? And I think that key word, if you read that, the word that I really pronounced too heavily was sticky, yeah? And my team really take the mickey out of me for that. When I say labels are sticky. And when it came out, they kept coming, and students did as well, so there's no need to laugh. The students came out, what are labels, Trev? Sticky. Yeah? And that's why that is, say, it's moving beyond the label. So there's a real focus on labels being sticky and this notion about othering. As soon as you put a label on somebody, you other them. You make them different. Okay? And so we then debate whether it's specialist or inclusive pedagogy. Yeah? So yeah, there are more toolboxes for autism than you can shake a stick at. I must have loads on my computer. So when somebody comes and say, I've got a kid in my class with autism, what to do? Know the kid. What are the strengths? What do they want to do? Don't just throw something at them. Don't just throw pecks at them. Yeah? So, and there's also that kind of, so it's about how we need to rethink autism and how we need to look at what is best. I'm not saying specialist pedagogy is better than inclusive pedagogy. I am saying there's a place for both. And in the book, I give you examples, and then you make your own mind up. That's the beauty of what I think working in this area is. It's about people making up their own mind. But they're coming, I say to our students, it's from research-informed practice. I give you what's out there, I tell you what the possibilities are, but then you make your own mind up. Come and argue it with me. Come and argue it with me. There's a real section, and this is again another theme of the book, there's a real section on transitions. Okay, so quite often when you look at SEND-TECs or you look at autism, it's very much about schools. And there is a section on transition into school and what schools can do to help support transitions. But there's also transitions from primary to secondary, from secondary to university, from university or from schools to colleges to adult services. So that's another focus of the book. There is a big focus on not just looking at children, not just looking at children in schools, looking at adult transitions, looking at supporting adults. So, for example, if you are a carer of an autistic individual, and that autistic individual is living with you, yeah, and I've worked with people, that young person is 35, 40, you're not getting any younger. So what I do look at is actually what happens in adulthood with carers who are also growing older. So again, there is sections on children and young people, there's equal sections on working with adults, because I know a lot of people work with autistic individuals in the adult provision. Big area, big one again, coming back in this, it's about the impact on diagnosis. So we look at the impact of diagnosis both in children but also in adults, and it's interesting to look at how adults go for diagnosis. And as you read the text, you'll look at it's not surprising to say there are some adults who say, some parents who say, oh, it's the best thing ever, I know why now I'm doing it, I know why I'm behaving it, whereas other people go, oh, it's doom and gloom. So it's interesting to get underneath that perception of diagnosis. And a particular area that I love researching is the impact it has on families. So the impact of autism on families, and there's the lived experience running all the way through that. And one of the chapters I've just recently written on play and on autism and families for the text, I use a springboard to look at the impact of COVID-19. I thought that's a really fascinating way. And again, you would think, we need to move away from the doom and gloom model. COVID had a real impact. Well, actually, it didn't necessarily have an impact, depending on how resilient the families are. So again, it's presenting you with the information, presenting you with your research, and then you making a decision, you making that informed decision. There's a section, because I wanted to write something to move away from the Western approach to autism, yeah? And if you think about the diagnostic tools, whether you think about DSM-5 or ICD-11, all the tools that go with the observations and that kind of schedule, it's Western. So there's a big section on how different cultures and subcultures view autism. And so in the text, I don't go for France does that, Germany does that, India does that. Yes, they are there, but in the section on international perspectives, it's focused on those areas. How is it recognized? How are the symptoms recognized? Yeah? How is it interpreted? Yeah? So you find some really, really interesting look at different cultures and whether some cultures view autism as supernatural. Yeah? But it's interesting also to look at how some parents are blamed for autism. Now you think, oh, that's not happens in Western society, but I'll give you a quick story. In autism, if you study autism, there's a thing called refrigerator mothers. In the 50s, the 60s, the mothers were blamed for the autism, not for the autism cause, but for the autism carrying on. Okay? Refrigerator mothers. It's a common, Google it. And you think, oh, no, we know everything about genetics, we know everything about what's happening in the brain, so there's no need to blame parents. I was delivering a CPD session to a college, a residential college, a couple of weeks with my colleagues, and two people put their hand up. These were staff. There's one young man in his 20s and said, that's me. Oh, okay. I was told, my mum was told she was to blame for my autism. And he was 24, 25. What's that about? And then somebody else put their hand up, which was a mother. That happened to me. That happened to me. When I went to looking for a diagnosis, I was told I was to blame. So it's important to think that attitudes have not sometimes changed that much as we want to. So you would think gone are the days of refrigerator mothers. And for the teacher trainers amongst you, there's a section on teacher attitudes. There's a section on how does initial teacher education, how I feel that should approach with SEND, and particularly with autism. So there's a section. It's like a bit like a milk tray. You've got little bits of everything. You might not like some bits. You might not like the coffee. I hate the coffee ones. Yeah, but you might like the strawberry ones. So when you have the book, go for the strawberry ones and don't read the coffee ones. Because that's the whole point in making it available to you. One thing I really found interesting was when you look at autism, I keep clicking this thing. When you look at autism in the media, oh, Rain Man. I've never seen Rain Man, and I don't want to see Rain Man, okay, because of all the sort of misconceptions it has. But that seems to be the starting point of autism in the media. I look at that, and then I start to look at the stereotypes. How is autism portrayed? So we look at the stereotypes in films. Yeah, we also look at the stereotype in television. Yeah, we start looking at the Big Bang Theory, the A Word. We look at Living My Family in Autism, the McGuinness family, Patty McGuinness's family. So we look at how autism is being portrayed, and we look at whether it's being portrayed in a particular issue. Very interesting when I was researching that, and how some Indian films, which have taken a Hollywood film and treated autism, but in a totally different way. So I'll leave that with you, that one, because a film about autism, how it has an autistic characteristic in Hollywood, how that's been reinterpreted in an Indian film. One, again, cyberbullying. I was really interested in cyberbullying, in how do people view cyberbullying, and particularly the impact it's got on people with autism, and also families. And then also video games. I know nothing about, I only know Sonic, whatever it is, the Hedgehog, yeah, and Mario Kong, is it Mario Kong? I don't know. Mario Kart, Donkey Kong, I don't know. I'm still at Pac-Man level. And really interesting. And if you want a mixed bag of research into how do people with autism, how do autistic young people and adults, why are they into games? There's some fascinating research into that. So I didn't know any of that, but our next door neighbor is into games. And when I was researching, I thought, I should have asked him. Yeah, and we call him, we have his nickname, we call him Sonic, because he's fascinated with games. And it wasn't until I produced the book, I thought, we could have asked Sonic. What is this Mario Kart and Donkey, whatever it's called, in that kind of thing? So that was for me, if you wanted an area of the book that I knew nothing about, it's the notion around video games. But again, mixed messages that are coming through. So that's just about my time. Stop doing that. And I hope, what I didn't want to do is, and people who know me, I don't stick to PowerPoints, and don't stand still very often. But when I had to do the filming, I had to sit still. That killed me. Yeah. You had all these cameras on me. Can you turn this way? Can you smile? And how many times I had to walk down the steps is beyond me. And when I walked down the steps and they filmed it, and then said, can you do it again, but can you hold on to the railings? How rude! How rude! And they said, no, it's not because of your age, it might be because it looks good on film. You can do that. And that book in the library, when you look at the whole thing, that book is not a SEND book. They said, can you go and get your SEND, your books? They're not there. So I don't know what it was, but they didn't want to show the cover. So that book that I'm looking at is not my book, and it's nothing to do with SEND. So there is I'm giving these hints, these games away. So I just wanted to give you a flavour for my getting inside my head. Yeah, it's not a nice place to be, really. Okay, it's full of this stuff, and occasionally comes out, and occasionally have battles with the publisher, I've just had the new book, the publisher, I said, you need to cut it down from 120,000 words to 70. I said, no chance, no chance. And they said, well, we need to. I said, no, we'll meet you halfway. So we met them halfway. Because I said, if you cut it down that much, you're not getting the areas that I wanted to research. So I hope that's given you a bit of a flavour for the book. And it is very much about looking at autism through different perspectives and different lenses. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. I present the research, I present the impact, I present the support / working with. Note that. So every time you see the word support, cross it out, put working with. And then it's very much about how it all links in. So, can I just thank everybody? And one thing I missed from that was Nick's team, the events team from that one. But, you know, I would have never dreamt that I wanted to do something like this. I would have just shoved it away. And Jerry and Sarah were, you know, almost like demons on my shoulder, saying, we need to do this, we need to do this. And we think it might be interesting for people. So I hope you enjoy the book. I hope you find it's not been written, although it calls us student perspectives, it has that focus, but hopefully it is the milk tray where you can get all the strawberry ones and ditch the coffee ones. So there may be something in there that you find useful. Thank you.